This is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat the GMAT, and today we have a very great session planned called Ding Analysis, Strategies and Cases. And to help lead today's session, we have Kofi Kankam, who is the co-founder of Admin Advantage. Just a couple words about Admin Advantage and Kofi before we begin. So for those of you who have not heard of this firm yet, Admin Advantage is actually one of the top MBA admissions consulting firms, and offers a number of great services from their group of expert consultants on staff, as well as generally just has a great website with lots of wonderful advice. At some point after this presentation, I highly recommend that you go to admitadvantage.com and also check out the bio pages and read about the company founders. Kofi, as I mentioned, is one of the founders. He's got a bachelor's degree from Harvard and went to Wharton, actually, for his MBA. So a person who's very familiar with what it takes to get into elite undergraduate and graduate programs. So Kofi has some very interesting background in serving as a corporate executive, an entrepreneur, and today he is now leading this fantastic firm called Admin Advantage, and you probably have seen some of his writing on our site in MBA Watch and other places. So Kofi, thank you so much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So, sorry, Eric, I had a little trouble getting my head through the door after all that high praise. I appreciate that. Thanks. So, Happy New Year, everybody. I know that obviously those of you around here have probably been denied from some schools. I know that's probably somewhat disappointing to you. Unfortunately, the way the numbers are, that's what happens to most people. So, when you look at these schools and they have a 10% or 15% or 7% in Stanford's case acceptance rate, that means that really good people don't get in. But the good news is that it's a new year, and there are always things you can do to make yourself a better candidate, and so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So again, my name is Kofi Kankam. I'm one of the co-founders of Admin Advantage. We do admissions consulting work. We have a good time. We try to make it fun and demystify the process, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about the company, not too much. That's all online, and Eric gave a great introduction. We're going to go through some general tips and strategies, some things that we saw. So we reviewed everyone who submitted basically an application that was denied from a particular school or set of schools. We reviewed every single application, and we mapped trends and tendencies. And so we're going to go through some of the things we saw and give you guys some ideas on that, and then we review 3 specific candidates. We've obviously redacted their names, so they're anonymous, but I assume that they're probably on here on the webinar itself. And it's a little bit unique in the sense that we're going to give you guys a chance to review pieces of their application. It wouldn't make sense for us to just say that they had a bad recommendation or they didn't answer a question correctly. So we've basically selected snippets of their applications, and we'll give you guys a chance to review them, and then we'll sort of talk about them. So this conversation may go a little bit long, and if it does, we're going to stay until all your questions are answered. If you have really pressing questions, feel free to ask during the course of the presentation. Eric will help moderate that, but if you can hold your questions to the end, that would be fantastic, okay? All right, so this is the boring stuff. My partner forces me to review, or else I'll get fired. But essentially, we work with candidates all the way from beginning to end. So if people are thinking about going to school, if they've started their applications, if they submitted their applications and are looking for interview help, those are the people we work with. So our process is really structured. We're all former sort of science major scientists. We've been very fortunate to have really, really great people who are alumni of all the top-tier schools: Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, INSEAD, Columbia, Chicago, Tuck, etc. But most importantly, there's a lot of diversity in terms of what people have done before and after school. So we have a speechwriter for Joe Biden. We have a couple of real estate entrepreneurs. We have some stay-at-home moms who are writers. We have people that work in finance and marketing, etc. So we've been very blessed to have really good people. Our company is built on a couple of different tenets. One, everyone that works here has to have gone to a really top-tier school, and served in some way, shape, or form on the other side of the table. So they have to have either served as a second-year interviewer or served as an alumni interviewer. We believe in really strong client focus, so we actually become pretty close to our clients, and We go to a lot of graduation parties and going away parties. It's always kind of fun to work within our company. But really, the proof is in the pudding. So all that stuff would be moot if our people were not getting into top-tier schools. And this is a snippet below. I guess snippet's the word of the evening. This is a small selection, a small sample size of some of the schools that our people have gone into, including people this year as well. Okay? Okay. There are 3 of us. We're all clones. I'm kidding. We all worked at Accenture. The 3 of us, Eli, Eric, and myself. We all worked at Accenture in separate cities. We're all Wharton grads, class of '04. Eric, who is the brains behind the organization, is a Wharton and Brown alumni interviewer, graduated from Brown in engineering, was a Twigo fellow at Wharton, which basically gave him a full ride. I worked at Accenture, also in New York, worked at Nectaphone, predecessor to Skype. As Eric mentioned, I went to Harvard College, stayed and pursued a master's degree in education, and then stayed at Wharton, went to Wharton and was a Joseph Wharton Fellow. And Eli, very comparable background. Rodney Morrison, basically worked at Lehman, worked at MLT, Managed Leaders for Tomorrow, and also served at Wharton undergrad and grad for about 7.5 to 8 years. So that's kind of our core management team. We have about 31 or 32 consultants who are alums, as mentioned, of all the top-tier schools. Okay, that's all we're going to talk about on us. Okay, so let's get to the meat of the matter. So here's what we did. So we basically took all of you, a lot of you, we had quite a number of submissions for dinged candidates, I guess good and bad. We would have liked less, right, because more of you would have gotten in. But we basically reviewed every single application, looked at the essays. Most of you submitted resumes, some of you did not, and then some of you had access to the recommendations, some of you did not. But we went through everything that we had, and we basically tallied, we classified issues, mistakes, omissions, etc., into different buckets and decided to talk about the ones that came up most often. Now let me take a step back and say this. You should not assume that just because you were denied, you made a mistake on your application. And that's a really important thing to understand. So, when we've done these other webinars with Beat the GMAT, we've said this, and I just want to repeat this. If you look at these top 20 schools, 70% of the people that apply are admissible, 7-0. Okay, 20 people apply, 6 of them have no chance of getting in, bad GMAT, bad GPA, poor work history, probably a combo of 2 or 3 of those. But 14 are really solid. 14 of those 20 are very good candidates. You could take those candidates, show them to the professors, and say, these are the people that will be in your classes, and they would have no problem with that. That's 14 out of 20. Now, of those 14, 2 to 5 are getting in. Okay, 2 is a 10% acceptance rate. Stanford's a little bit smaller even because it's such a small school. It's a little bit lower rather because it's such a small school. But literally, in the top 20 programs, even top 30 programs, for the most part, no more than 30% of the people are getting in. So you're looking at 2 to 6 of those people of the qualified 14 getting in. So just keep that in mind. That means a lot of good candidates don't get a shot to get in. That said, most of the applications we looked at, if not all of them, had slight issues, challenges that were not addressed that could have made the difference. Okay, anyway, so we chose 3 cases. We tried to choose cases which really clearly illustrated issues that also offered an opportunity for you guys to learn, okay? So really, don't be discouraged also if you did not get chosen. We'll probably do this again. Beat the GMAT's interested, we'll do this again. And we'll do another denied candidate applicant webinar, after round 2 if it makes sense. So we think that you guys will get a lot of value even if you weren't selected. And obviously we can only choose 3, and there are lots of you that signed up and who are attending. Okay. So here's some themes that we saw. The first, really most important mission that we saw, the clearest issue was people not identifying a brand. We looked through a couple dozen applications, and literally only 2 of them had a clear brand, i.e. only 2 of them put the admissions officer in a position to say to their admissions committee members, this person should be accepted to our class because they have intellectual horsepower, because they are really analytical, because they are great communicators, because they are civically or community-minded, because they are persevering, because they're able to make decisions with limited information, because they are able to lead without authority. So only 2 of you guys out of all the dozens that applied, only 2 of you really wrote an application that really clearly illustrated your interest in conveying 3 to 5 leadership characteristics that we'll call your brand. Only a couple of you did it, and only a couple of you did it. Some of you did it maybe in one essay or 2, maybe some of you did it in a resume, but not only 2 of you did it across these 4 platforms, right? And actually, we don't know if all of you got interviews, but you know, there are really 5 entire platforms. There are essays, there are resumes, there are letters of recommendation, there is the non-essay data portion of your application, and the interview. So we had 4 of them, right? We had your resume, we had your essays, your rec letters, and your data portion of your application. And literally, this was a huge issue. And what I mean by that is that, you know, most of the people that were rejected wrote to the essays. They basically just answered the questions on the essays, and they didn't answer the meta questions. So if you guys think of like programs like Meet the Press, where people go on, you know, candidates go on, they answer the questions that are asked, they also have talking points. They also have, you know, really strong a set of objectives that they're trying to illustrate while they answer the question. And this is analogous to that. You have to show a brand, and most of you did not do that, okay? We also saw that there was an unclear differentiation strategy. So we had a lot of Indian applicants, a lot of Indian male applicants. And, you know, not to sort of single out that group, but that group is a real clear illustration that it's a very competitive pool. A lot of people apply from that pool. People have really good scores. People, you know, sometimes have very typical backgrounds. So you work at Infosys, you work at Microsoft, you work at Wipro. In the States, you know, some of the other candidates, it was people that worked at McKinsey, people that worked at Goldman. So it was your stereotypical companies, people had stereotypical roles, and they did not make enough effort to differentiate themselves. A lot of them had good scores, right? They had compelling GMATs, compelling GPAs, but there really wasn't enough attention paid to the motivation to go to school, what the, you know, what they were going to offer in school, what the catalyst was to potentially pursue a career. Those are the areas where you can make yourself a different candidate, and we didn't see enough of that, okay? There wasn't enough of this sort of differentiated offering, as well as, you know, in terms of considering what exactly you're going to bring to the program academically in the classroom, academically outside the classroom with regard to your learning teams and study groups, outside the classroom with regard to your leadership in different clubs and organizations, and outside the classroom as an alumnus. There wasn't enough attention paid to those things. And what we could see is that most of you were very much constrained by the word count. So, you know, I have the feeling a lot of you probably thought about answering those sorts of questions, but didn't feel you could do so because you didn't have enough capacity or space. But the reality is the really good candidates, those people that got into the schools, answered the question and then also differentiated themselves and offered a really strong brand. Okay? So the first point is you have to formulate a brand that's consistent across your application. And we, you know, again, in the dozens of people we saw, you know, a very, very small percentage of the people did that across all 4 platforms. Okay, recommenders. So we saw some recommendations which were not strong, meaning that the recommenders were not effusive enough in their praise of the candidates. The recommenders did not appear to be prepared, meaning they did not have talking points. They were not illustrating specific stories or accomplishments that a strong applicant or a prepared applicant would have basically prepared them to do, okay? And that was a huge issue. Also, we saw that some of you did not feel comfortable or for whatever reason did not have your boss or your direct supervisor write your recommendation. And you didn't describe that. You didn't explain why that was the case in your optional essay. And for most of the schools, if you look at the instructions, they tell you, and even if they don't tell you, that you should still assume most of the schools want a direct supervisor. And it's okay if you don't have one, but you have to say something. You have to indicate that. And a lot of the candidates that we looked at in this exercise did not do that, okay? Another thing we saw, which was a huge, huge issue, and this might be even number 2, is we saw a lot of you that really did not put a lot of time into the actual application. I mean the data portion of the application, the fill in the blank portion of the application. You didn't do enough of that. So we saw a lot of people, most of you did not have strong portions of this, you know, did not make this a real focus of your application, did not make the non-essay data portion enough of a focus. And so we could tell that some of you wrote your essays first, spent a lot of time getting everything together, and then kind of on the back end, the day of, the day before, maybe 2 days before, just kind of filled that in randomly. Just filled it in quickly and did not take a lot of time to, to basically show the impact that you had, to show the impact in your jobs and your extracurriculars, and basically did not take a lot of time to really rank, what things were most important to you. Most of the people that we saw, which is obviously a subset of the people on this webinar, but a lot of the people just did not spend enough time doing that. So that was a throwaway portion, and that was really clear in reviewing this. Now, it may not be clear to you, but if we can see it, okay, and we're professionals doing this, think about what admissions committee members can see. I mean, they review thousands of applications, each of them. So they can tell when you sort of shirk or go through this really quickly, and it was really evident that it was rushed, that it wasn't focused, that it wasn't targeted, and you didn't use it as an additional piece. You kind of said, this is a throwaway piece. I've already covered this in my resume or in some of my essays. I'm just going to fill this in. And what I'm here to tell you is that if it weren't important, they wouldn't ask you to do it. So just keep in mind, you really have to focus on impact. And there are also typos in these sections as well. And we actually saw a couple of candidates that literally stopped, basically just stopped mid-sentence in a section or two because there was like a character count. And so people literally would stop like in a phrase in the middle of like a sentence, would just stop and end it and move to the next section. And that's a clear sign of sort of sloppiness and not enough of attention to detail in a competitive market, okay? Okay, resume. So we saw people that did not start the most recent activities. I know a lot of you are from, different cultures. The American business schools, and that's generally what we're talking about. Most of you, if not all of you, I think there were a couple applied to like NCI, but even those schools are kind of fairly quote-unquote Western, if you will. Some of you guys started with, your most distant activities, the activities that you did, in the past, in the furthest past. I'm trying to think of the right word, but you know what I mean. You started basically listing stuff you did 5 years ago at the top, and then when you got to the bottom of your resume, you were listing the stuff that's most current. You want to flip that, okay? A lot of you had multiple page resumes, and that's not really acceptable unless you're a PhD candidate or you have a PhD, or maybe you're 10 years out. I mean, I'm 36, and I have a one-page resume and three degrees. So I found a way to fit it in. I had to cut out stuff I hated, but you guys have to do that as well. Okay, so what we saw was people that had multiple page resumes. Typically, those resumes didn't make them stronger candidates. It just made it harder for a reviewer to pick out what's most important. And people listed their entire, it seemed like their entire portfolio of activities in a particular job. They listed all that out. So we saw one candidate with like a 4-page resume, and he literally had almost, like he averaged 8 to 11 bullet points in each task. And you really want to be, in each job, you really want to be looking at 4 to 6 at a max, okay? We saw people that did not give dates, did not have timelines, and that was sort of atypical, right? But what we did see, which is very typical, is candidates that did not quantify their achievements. So candidates that said, I managed a lot of people, we led a successful launch of a product. Well, how is it successful? How many times was it downloaded? What kinds of revenues did you see? What was the revenue growth? How many people did you manage? How many of those people were promoted? That kind of thing, right? So you have to quantify your accomplishments, and we saw people did not do that on the resume, okay? Generally, we also saw people that wrote really heavily about your college experience. Now, granted, there were a couple of you that were just out of school. I think we may have even had one 2+2 candidate. That's Harvard's program. But most of you that are 3 to 4 or 5 years out of school, your college experience really should not be the flagship experience. If you're in finance and you work in banking, investment banking, you're going to be given a little bit of slack in terms of not having a huge amount of extracurricular activities just because your work weeks are crazy. But for the rest of you, and even for those bankers, I can tell you the bankers we see that are successful, they find time to do stuff, right? And so we saw a lot of people that did not really write with depth about other things outside of their college experience, and that was a problem. A lot of you seem to, we call it getting starstruck. So people wrote about, all the reasons they want to go to Harvard or why they loved INSEAD, but they did not really indicate what they're going to bring to the classroom. So, you've got to put yourself in the admissions committee members' shoes. So they know their school's great. They work there. And granted, you have to have a little bit of that. They have to realize that you love the school, but too many of you spent too much time speaking about all the stuff you're going to get from the school. Your cousin went there. You were impressed that, someone from your country went there, or maybe, someone wrote about Harvard. Mitt Romney went there. They wrote about these people, and that's great, but they spent way too much time thinking about that and not writing about how they're going to make the place better. And that's what the admissions committee member is looking for. Okay, so that's called getting starstruck in our lingo. People also didn't necessarily address weaknesses, and so they didn't really. They were sort of saying they're going to do great things and they're going to achieve great things and they're going to be top of the class, etc. But they really didn't address the fact that they didn't necessarily have great things in their past and they didn't do great in college. And so, there's a saying, the past, I forget what the saying is, but basically the past is a prologue to the future, okay? And so what that means is if you're not strong historically, admissions committee members are looking at your background, especially academically, as a proxy for how you're going to do in business school. And even professionally, what did you do in the 2 to 4 years after college? That's a very good indicator from the admissions committee member's perspective and how successful you're going to be after school, after business school. And so a lot of you didn't address that, okay? We talked about this, we love our Indian candidates, and I say this out of love. You guys have to work really hard to differentiate because there's so many of you guys applying to school. And, even, it's funny, even I was telling Eric and B this before we sort of got on, there were a lot of Indian candidate submissions, and a lot of them look pretty similar. So just realize that, you are going to have to differentiate yourself. And, we believe in being totally honest. You're going to have to differentiate yourself in a way that potentially, an Egyptian woman is not going to have to differentiate herself because there are not a lot of them applying to business school, okay? And obviously, the other thing is we saw a lot of spelling mistakes, and we're kind of taken aback by that. A lot of grammar mistakes. That's just an instant application killer. So you've got to go through, you've got to review it. And we'll actually talk about one of the candidates that we looked at actually said he never checks his work, which I thought was pretty honest and really debilitating, but you have to go through that, okay? All right, essays. We saw people that had really conversational essays, okay? They wrote about, they literally wrote as if they were sort of speaking to a friend. People did not address the optional essay. You have bad grades or a bad GMAT or a terrible work experience, you got to do that, okay? But you don't want to write about it ad nauseum. Some of these optional essays, I know, it's exciting to have an optional essay that's unlimited word count, especially when the rest of your essays do have a capacity constraint or word constraint. But we had people that just went, they were doing like Shakespearean soliloquy. I mean, it was just pages and pages, and you can't do that. We definitely admire candor, and we suggest you are honest, but some people were too honest. Some people talked about being lazy in college, but they're going to turn around. That's being too honest, okay? Some things are better left unsaid. We'll show a candidate that actually did that, which is, I hope this candidate can laugh at it. It kind of made us chuckle a little bit. We saw people didn't answer all the questions. And what I mean by that is, yes, they wrote a response to every single separate question, but some of these questions, i.e. like a question one may be a three-part question. And we saw a lot of candidates that wrote answers to the first two-thirds of that, Section A, Section B, but they totally ignored Section C because they were at the word count, and you can't do that. That's what we mean by not answering all the questions. People wrote about general platitudes of the school. I really want to go to School X because I'm going to learn a lot, because it's a great, jumping point for my career, because you have amazing students. Literally, you could take that and insert any other school in that. We have an example of that also, okay? And that's a no-no. And then, again, we saw people that didn't really offer anything differentiating. So if you have when you do this going forward, have your partner, have your best friend, have a colleague read it. If they can't see that you're unique, if they can't see there's anything differentiating, you need to go back to the drawing board, okay? So let's get into it. This is exciting. Okay, so first candidate, basically major in computer science at Dubai, did really well academically, strong GMAT, Indian, knew a couple different languages, pretty impressive. Basically had about 3 years of work experience doing mobile telecom in India, had been sort of a senior executive, so it was fairly impressive in that sense, being senior executive. Extracurriculars, very weak, and they were looking at INSEAD, okay? So again, Academically, solid scores. We like that. You know, background's a check, so that's kind of like a neutral. So because there's so many Indians applying, it was just super competitive. And I actually feel bad for a lot of Indian candidates because it's just really competitive, and there's no way around it. Now, it's competitive for everyone. Don't get me wrong, but this is definitely something that we noticed. Work experience. So they had, you know, very limited work experience. So they had 2 years of work experience in terms of applying. And on top of that, they really had no management. So they had not managed people, and they really hadn't managed tasks that much. So that was definitely sort of, you know, a downside verdict, you know, sort of a negative, we'll say. Extracurriculars, we thought were really weak. And I don't want you guys to take offense that we're saying this. We're doing this because we care about you guys. We want you guys to get in going forward, okay? So, but the extracurriculars were really weak here. They wrote about being active in college. Now, granted, they're 2 years out of college, but the stuff they did in college, Yearbook Computer Club, they weren't leaders in there. And they did not indicate any activities after college. And that was a real hindrance in terms of most of these business schools considering themselves, especially INSEAD. It's one of the schools that considers itself a leadership training ground. It's not a school just for capitalists. It's a school that trains leaders. And their belief is that, you know, leaders, they want you to come in with some of the tools, some of the experience so that they can build you more effectively. And if you don't have that, that can be a real issue, okay? Recommendations. So here's what we saw. These are some real snippets. I see potential in him to succeed, right? They're very focused and gritty. They're quick learners, and they're able to sort of implement the knowledge. Really, you know, the best amongst the peer group, okay? Improvement selection. This is what the recommender said. Okay, he needs to basically get more experience to see, sort of have a bigger picture, more holistic view. Okay, you know, he basically is, you know, a little bit malleable when it comes to basically being persuaded. We need him to have a little bit more focus, a little bit more of conviction, let's say. But you know, they wrapped up saying, with experience, this person's going to get rid of the weaknesses. Okay, our verdict is this is pretty good. Okay, quality candidate. That's what the recommender is saying. This person's a good candidate. They just need a little more seasoning, okay? And they've got a really strong future. So we were pretty happy with this. We thought this was pretty solid, okay? The essays, lots of spelling mistakes, real issue, okay? Now, you could argue that if English is not your first language, then you may be given a little bit more slack. But, you know, India was a British colony, and I know that Ghana was, where my parents are from, was a British colony, okay? So there's a little bit of a higher standard, okay? It's different if your first language is German and you're from Germany. But we saw way too many grammatical errors also. You can see this highlighted in red. That's kind of the problem area, okay? Misguided message. This is what I was saying. So this person wrote, I was known to finish test prep early, and I rarely revised material before an exam, okay? And my work attitude is similar. No. Right? This is a direct quote. This basically undermines what this candidate's trying to say. I understand what this candidate meant to say, but this basically is indicating, right? This could be interpreted to mean, look, I'm not super thorough. I'm not exceptionally detail-oriented, especially when I've made grammatical mistakes. And I'm also not team-oriented, because when I finish off my work, I don't go see what other people are doing where I can make a contribution to help my team. This basically says, you know, in the words of Terrell Owens, I get mine, you know what I mean, and I'm kind of done, right? And that's a problem. So those are some of the issues we saw. Here are 4 paragraphs. These are literal paragraphs. I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds to read them, okay? Literally. This is where Vanna White cues her music. Okay, I'm not giving you 30 seconds. I'm giving you 15, 20 seconds. So this is a question about giving a description of the candidate himself. These are 4 paragraphs that basically we put together. These are 4 incomplete paragraphs, right? They don't say anything. They are not developed enough, right? So I like me help for my account actions. Okay, that's fine. But that's not a nuance. It's not a developed paragraph. That's not That's not giving meat. That's just saying, that's sort of general platitudes. An example of this would be, I like being held accountable for my actions. If you want to make this stronger, give an example or two. You could have a developed paragraph for the first portion, right? I like being accountable for my actions. You could develop that, and it could be the same exact length, but the second sentence could be an example. For example, when I made a mistake in my job, I was the first person to, volunteer to do the rework and make sure that nobody else on my team would make the same mistake by teaching other people, right? I taught people of my mistakes. That's a simple example. You can wordsmith that, but this is what we saw across the whole entire essay. Okay, it's kind of like, it reads like a novel. The second paragraph, I prefer tasks that require analysis and logic application. Okay, so interesting. I liked scientific topics as a child. I would look things up on Wikipedia because computer science engineer. I've taken that path because it reflects this above stated disposition. Okay, what does that mean? How does that fit into the context of the rest of your application? How is that useful? What brand is being offered here, right? And think about it in the context of the brand of my career and or the brand of how this candidate's going to make a contribution on campus. This was not strong, right? This is just this is like a Trivial Pursuit, or like, if you're on a first date and someone asks you, tell me about yourself. That's not the same question as someone asking on an application, tell me about yourself, right? Like, it's the same word question, but the depth of answer that you're looking for, this is way too casual, right? So in a business school application, everything that you're saying should be moving towards offering a specific talking point, a specific expression of your brand, and this did not do that in these paragraphs. And again, the essays, just like the non-essay data portion overall, they were just underwhelming accomplishments. Okay, so working on a college yearbook, that's dated, right? That's a couple of years ago. You didn't even say you were the editor of that either, right? And then, reducing the errors on IT engagement, that's okay. It's not spectacular, right? And I say this in the context of, I have a feeling that this candidate probably had much better stuff in their arsenal and just didn't spend enough time thinking through those things they wanted to add. So that's candidate number one. Essays, too conversational, right? So literally, we did the underlining, but this is like a conversation. I kind of read like a movie script. So this is like a conversation that this guy was having, it looks like, with trying to get a certain position, an internship, right? And the quotes, ma'am, he's giving an inside perspective on how we felt internally. It's a novel, right? This is not business-oriented enough. This whole paragraph could be summarized saying, a disappointment. I went to look for a job. You can have to wordsmith. I went to look for a job, and I initially was rebuffed because, basically the employer felt that I did not dedicate enough time and resources towards pursuing that job. She felt I was too focused on my academics and not expressing enough interest and passion for the opportunity. Unfortunately, I had to recognize that she was right, and I took that lesson to heart, and in the future did X, Y, and Z, right? It's a business summary. It is professional, and it gets out of this sort of movie script back and forth discussion that's exceptionally conversational and just somewhat inappropriate, okay? INSEAD. Here are the quotes that this candidate wrote on why they want to go to INSEAD, right? Because I'm going to be prepared to interact and engage with people from different backgrounds, because of the rigorous academic background, because you've got strong entrepreneurship strategy, marketing electives, because you've got one of the best international alumni networks in the world. We saw a lot of this. So take out INSEAD, insert Wharton. Take out Wharton, insert Columbia. Take out Columbia, insert Chicago, right? It's saying this applies to all the schools. So there was nothing here about specific classes you wanted to take, specific professors you wanted to study under specific tracks that INSEAD's known for, the position of INSEAD being somewhat of a Western university, but also being in Europe and also offering the capacity to get to INSEAD in Singapore. Nothing that was specific to INSEAD, nothing that conveyed a real passion for going to INSEAD, and that was definitely a weakness. Okay, we'll keep it moving here. I see a couple of questions, but I'm going to keep it moving. So takeaways. One, build your resume, right? Candidate one, I think you're on the line here. You're on this webinar. 3 years experience, a little bit light. You need to have more leadership demonstration, and your essays we thought were a little bit weaker because you don't have enough experience to draw on. So it's okay to apply as a candidate that has 2 years of experience, but you better be bringing it. Like they say at P90X, Eric Bond, that's for you. You got to bring it. You just didn't have enough stuff, quote unquote, to really write about. Okay, so we also wanted to see you get more involved outside of work. You've got to indicate, this is your opportunity to indicate where you've managed people. You also have to focus on stretch roles. So your job seems to be composed of stuff that you're kind of good at. You don't seem like you're really stretched, really pushing the envelope, so to speak. So find that outside of work, okay? And really focus on your legacy and your impact after you leave. While you're there, but also your legacy after you leave, okay? Way too many mistakes. We talked about that. Really focus on building your brand and your reasons for an MBA. Overall, generally, you're going to be a good guy, a good candidate in a year or two, okay? But right now, you're not. You may be in a position where you can apply in round one after, which is going to be based in about 8 months, 8 to 9 months. You'll definitely be a candidate in 2 years. You've got to sort of make that decision. But we think you'll be pretty good and probably have more success if you just sort of get these things together, okay? Candidate 2, okay? Computer science major, I know. Indian, but different candidate, okay? Work experience, basically had 3 different gigs, right? It worked for a little bit, but had left firms, okay? That's something, we'll talk about a little bit. Extracurriculars, solid, pretty solid, okay? So the verdict here, good, okay? Could be better on the GMAT, especially applying as Indian candidate, looking at, Kellogg. That's basically about the mean. So you could potentially, if you thought you had, we kind of got the impression this person thought they could do better on their GMAT, or they could do better on their GMAT. So if you think you can sort of raise it by 30 points, take it again, especially if you have time. Take it again. Your 720 is in the bag. Now you're playing with house money, so to speak. So now you're going for the gusto, okay? We talked about this. It's a little bit competitive. We didn't like the work experience. So, we have a check here, but to be candid with you, I love the fact you had big brand names on your background, right? You worked with like every major, or 3 of the major technology companies in the world, and certainly in India. But the problem was that you basically jumped around, right? So you were at IBM for a couple of months, okay? And that was didn't give you a lot of time to grow, and also it posed a problem in one of your application essays, which we'll talk about. Extracurriculars, pretty solid, but you were a member. So you did stuff which basically was really, really benevolent and helpful in addressing huge issues, right? But we didn't see you in a leadership role. You were basically a member of the team. And again, business schools, American business schools especially, are looking at themselves as places to train leaders. They're not looking at the places where you can just make a lot of money. Now, some of that's marketing. Okay, we get it. But you have to basically showcase that. And you just did not showcase a lot of huge leadership. Okay? Recommendations. Okay, this is pretty solid, right? Youngest member of the team, had exceptional leadership, won the client's confidence, really team-oriented, better team-oriented than pretty much everybody else, right? And when you were the team lead, you did okay. Now, this would have been a great opportunity. Whatever they were talking about, you being the team lead, you should have written about that a little bit more in your application, okay? All right, improvement. So this is the suggestions your recommender had, okay? So basically, they thought that, it was a little bit challenging for you to sort of, get up to speed, get in sync, but that sort of turned out, that you sort of did that, but they said, you could get better at that. This is our sort of parentheses. Basically, you didn't ask a manager early in your career to write a recommendation. That's okay. They wrote about you being a little bit wary and taking some calls of your own. You were, a little bit sort of nervous getting started. That's okay. Overall, we thought this was pretty good. Okay, so we didn't see huge issues in the recommendations in these 2 candidates. Okay, strong recommendations, pretty good. I mean, the areas of improvement understood. You're a fairly young candidate, and you took care of the fact that it wasn't a direct manager by mentioning this in your optional essay. So you covered your bases here. Okay. Grammar errors again. These are the grammar errors at the top, right? In course of my professional essay, in course of my professional in the course, right? At one hand, I had a very good blank responsibility job at IBM. I had a lot of, we don't even sure exactly what you were saying, right? I felt that MBA is not just a degree. Again, grammatical errors which potentially either show, which could hinder you in your climb to sort of the top. Obviously, if you're running your own company or you're going to be an entrepreneur, communication is going to be critical. And the fact that there were these grammatical errors either showed, one, potentially not a great communicator, and or secondly, you're not paying attention to detail. And both of those are really big deal breakers, okay? Essay 1. So we saw this a lot in a lot of candidates. So this is about your career progress to date, future plans, and why MBA, okay? So you wrote a lot about basically the past, what you did before, why you did it. You wrote about sort of your passion for ideas. You spent, 1/6 of the essay doing that, actually leaving a little bit more, right, close to 20%, talking about passion for client service, passion for people. You didn't spend enough time focused on the future and why you want an MBA. So you spent way too much time. You literally spent 5/6, which is whatever, 80+% of your essay focused on the past. This is about looking forward, especially because your past is somewhat captured in your recommendations and in your resume. You've got very limited opportunity, very limited real estate to focus on your future, and you spent way too much time doing that, okay? Literally, by the time you got to sort of the meat of this, which is really the critical point, you left yourself 100 words, and that was a real issue for you, okay? Essay 4. So they asked about, this is Kellogg, the riskiest professional decision you'd made. Now, you wrote about taking this new job at Tata. Now, you had only been at IBM for about, I guess, it looked like 4 months. And so it wasn't clear to the reader why this was a risky proposition. You'd only been there for 4 months. So what's so risky? It looked like, you'd only been at IBM for 4 months, and you look at you're kind of getting a better job at Tata, right? Tata Industries, which is a huge technology company for those who don't know. It looked like a better opportunity. So we didn't really understand the value of kind of what you could be leaving. And this is sort of a general point for those of you who didn't write this application about answering the question thoroughly, okay? So you didn't give your thinking on that. You didn't give your, sort of the rationale for why you included it. And this is what we see a lot of times in our candidates who sometimes don't get into all their schools. Maybe they get into some, but they don't get into others, as well as a lot of the candidates we saw here. This is really illustrative of the dozens of people that we saw, okay? Maintaining professionalism. So, look, I love a beverage like the next man. Most of you guys know I'm a huge Ohio State and Cleveland Browns fan. I spend a lot of my weekends watching games, throwing it back with my wife, who's also from Ohio. But you can't write about being interested in alcoholic beverages, okay? Now, maybe if you're going to do brand management, that's okay. But this is what you said. This is kind of a paraphrase, but the quotes are fairly accurate. You basically said, due to the fact I'm interested in alcoholic beverages, I'm going to enrich the wine club or the alcohol club with Indian customs. I get that. I understand that. But this is not the time when you want to indicate that you love alcohol, okay? You're going to have plenty of opportunities to demonstrate that when you get to school. So there's some things that are better left unsaid. And frankly, this is not the only time we've seen something like this, okay? So you've got to, those of you, the rest of you, you've got to be really conscious of that. All right. So I'm not even giving you guys a chance to read all this, but I'm going to say this is the optional essay. This is really fluffy, right? I like long bike drives, sports, movies, parties. The guy's writing about how all this stuff contributed to the lack of focus in college, and essentially, like he, made a point to never make that kind of mistake again. And when he applied for a job, he got it at Infosys. Fantastic story, but it reads like a novella, right? So it's just like the first can. It's a little bit fluffy, and it doesn't. You really could have summarized this in 3 sentences, right? So I made mistakes. When I initially got to college, I spent a large part of my college career focused on leisurely activities, not paying enough attention to my academic studies. Over the course of time, I realized I was hampering my activities, hampering my grades, my academics, which is why I scored a 67%. Later, I internalized the lesson. When I applied for Tata, I made sure I left no stone unturned. I made sure everything was up to speed, and basically I achieved this coveted job offer. Period. Keep it moving. Go to the next one, right? So that's a lesson for a lot of you. Leadership experience, we talked about this. There's a difference between being a team member and being a leader. Now, you don't have to be a leader of the whole thing, because a lot of you guys won't have the chance. You're so young, but you got to lead something. Maybe you led a certain portion, you led a certain certain piece of the analysis. You got to write about it from that perspective. It's not enough to write about being a part of a team. There are way too many qualified candidates applying who led teams, and you guys are really good candidates. Most of you are doing yourself a disservice by not writing about that. Okay. All right. Client 2, we love you. You got a good foundation. You need more leadership, and I'd like to see you get promoted at Tata. You haven't been there that long, and the shift from IBM was too quick. It looked like you came in almost as a lateral hire. You got to show promotion. You got to show progress. Okay. We suggest you get help. We obviously help people with their essays, but get professional help. Get serious help with your essays. Okay. You made a lot of errors. You also need to really distill your message, and you need sort of some guidance topics on your essay. Overall, I loved your recommendations. I thought, if you work on your leadership, you basically have a lot of good stuff. Okay, you've got pretty good grades, good GMAT. You've got good stuff. I'd like to see you improve your GMAT a little bit, but you've got a lot of good assets. You got to work on executing. That's really what it comes down to. So I'm giving you a bit of hope. I'm not saying you're going to get it next year, but I believe that you can make yourself a much more compelling candidate, and that's the good news. All right. The bad news, by the way, is when you're a candidate with great GMAT, great GPA, great essays, you've really expounded well on your sort of virtues, and then you don't get rejected. Then you're like, what do I do to make myself better? And that happens, right? But the first 2 candidates, you guys have stuff you can work on. Okay? Background 3, okay. We got a Georgetown person, did pretty well there. GMAT, decent. Caucasian guy, 2 languages, like that, work experience, entrepreneur in the recent future. They worked for a group for about, they've been working sort of 2 gigs now, it looks like, and they basically have been entrepreneurial. So we like this candidate quite a bit, right? And very strong extracurriculars to an extent, okay? So GMAT could be a little bit better on the academics, or GMAT could be a little bit better, but, I didn't think it was terrible, to be honest with you. Eric and I, Eric, we both looked at this. We have some disagreements from time to time. I thought it was decent. It could be better, no question. Wharton has a mean GMAT of like 720 plus, but it was decent. You're a little short though on both, and that's a little bit of an issue, right? You've got a 355 mean at Wharton, basically a 720 plus, so you're short on both assets, okay? And that's a little bit of a concern, and I agree with Eric in that sense. But overall it was decent, okay? So competitive, being sort of a white male applying to school. We loved your entrepreneurial focus. Super solid, differentiates you, especially from all the people that work at McKinsey and Goldman, all these firms that say they want to be entrepreneurs that haven't done it. We didn't love the fact that you didn't have any huge successes, or really strong identifiable successes we could build your application around. Okay? Really loved your extracurriculars. Solid. This reads leadership. Super solid, and it reads investment in other people, right? Especially with the kids. Love that. Really solid. Recommendations, okay? So you had your current supervisor at Wolfpack, community representative. You didn't use your optional essay to explain your recommender choice. Should have done that, okay? I'm not saying it would have made a huge difference, but definitely something you left on the table, so to speak. So the verdict overall, we think that you could have used, this would have been a great opportunity with your recommender to basically use a client, okay, or a customer. That would have been amazing because you really would have underscored your ability to be a successful entrepreneur, and you really would have differentiated yourself from other people that have their bosses apply. So that was a missed opportunity there. Community rep, you kind of have that to a little bit, but I wanted to see, I recommend that you see the recommendation in advance because your community representative, even though they did it, their perspective could be different from a professional recommendation. So that's a lesson for those of you. Whenever you have someone who's a little bit of an outlier, you need to make sure you manage that recommendation hard, okay? When an outlier, I mean an outlier from your other recs, especially those schools where you've got 3, like Stanford and Harvard. You definitely need to really be, super vigilant. You need to really shape it because sometimes they can give a mixed message that doesn't fall in line or doesn't sync with the rest of your application and certainly the rest of your recommendations. All right. So you did a good job, in the essay sort of highlighting your passion, right? You spoke about being an agent of change. Pretty solid, okay? So I like the fact that you basically wrote, about your focus on sort of changing business for the better. That's solid. What you want to make sure is that you don't basically there are a couple things. One, you don't seem like you should be going to the Kennedy School or a School of Social Work or Public Policy or something like that. You want to make sure that you're clear on business school being what you want to do. We see this all the time. Candidates that do joints, even candidates that don't do joint applications, especially the nonprofit educational type candidates who come in, it's not clear that they've really articulated why business school makes sense from versus law school versus school for public policy, public health, et cetera. Okay? So you want to be really clear on that. So your professional objectives. So you did not write about basically the question, right? So you wrote about being an entrepreneur, what you've done in the past. That's okay, but listen, they're going to get that in your first, in your recommendations, and you're going to get that in your resume. Because realize most of you that didn't apply to warrant, you don't realize they shortened their essays this year. So this first question was only 300 words. So you really had to get to the point. It's not the typical 500-word, 600-word essay. If 300 words were your professional objectives, I think that they should change that, but who am I? But you wasted way too much time about being an entrepreneur, what you've done in the past. You spent half your essay doing that, right? And you weren't speaking about the future, okay? You really had only your last two essays really speak about your desire to work with no more geysers, and it didn't really speak about what you want to do after that. So when you talk about your professional objectives, guys, that's a short-term question and a long-term question. That's asking you, what do you want to do in the first 2 to 7 years after business school? And then what do you want to do after that? How do you want to pivot? What are you going to learn? What are you going to obtain in terms of contacts, networks, training, capital that's going to help you make your pivot to your super hardcore long-term pursuit when you're chasing the brass ring and really getting after it? And it's really tough to answer in 300 questions, no doubt, but it's much harder when you spend half of it talking about the past and leave yourself 150 words to answer the future. Okay? And that's what we saw here, and that's what we saw in other candidates. Okay? So this essay was about talking about, the second essay form, we turned down an opportunity. Well, you didn't really give enough detail. Here's the paragraph. I'm going to let you guys sort of read this. I'm going to give you guys 15, 20 seconds to read it, and then I'll sort of give my summary. Okay. So some of you guys may say, well, I kind of answered the question. He spoke about generally, he declined the offer. He gave pretty bullet point issues, but you didn't give your thought process behind it. You didn't say, there wasn't nuanced enough, okay? What was the process? So they want to see how you're thinking, excuse me, as a manager, and you didn't really sort of give the positive side. It didn't seem like it was nuanced. It didn't seem like it was a hard decision, and they want to see that, right? This is a real opportunity that you basically really, really strongly would have considered doing it. Now, granted, someone could say, we're going to give you an opportunity to become, a janitor and sort of clean latrines, in an Army boot camp. That's not a real opportunity, but a real opportunity is one that you're agonizing over, one that you're really thinking about, and they want to see how you think through this. They want to see that you went and devised a list of pros and cons. I went out and spoke to, mentors in this field. I put together, a cost-benefit analysis to determine, what I was going to get out of it and also what I could contribute. I really stepped back and said, okay, I need to develop X, Y, and Z skills, and this is not going to help me basically towards the future, right? You didn't do any of that, and so that's why we found this essay adequate, but it wasn't excellent, right? And so we want to push you guys to excellence. It definitely was adequate, right? You kind of answered the question, but you really didn't because you didn't dig deep in the thought process. And the thought process is 75% of this essay, and the other 25% is kind of what happened. And we see that all the time with candidates, okay? So for you, takeaways, you got to finish hard, okay? So you need to show that you've exited, that you've had successes, right? We've seen the passion for entrepreneurship, but if you're really going to differentiate yourself and come in as somebody who isn't interested in entrepreneurship, rather someone who's had success in entrepreneurship, there's a difference, right? If you're going to be that latter candidate, which is going to make you really strong, you've got to finish. It's not enough to start. You have to show some kind of successes. It doesn't have to be Facebook or Beat the GMAT, right? But it's got to be something, okay? So your essays also went a little bit off track. Think about making an outline where you sort of think about your brand and think about the different aspects of the application, especially when it's a multi-part question, and make sure you think about your stories up front, okay? Overall, love the passion for entrepreneurship. We obviously are entrepreneurs, so we appreciate that. You got to have a win, okay? Think about ways you can improve your GMAT. I'd love to see you in the 730 plus range, if possible, especially on your quant side, especially quant. And keep doing your service in the extracurriculars, okay? All right, guys, so that's kind of it on the 3 candidates. Again, if the moment arises, we'll get to more for round 2. Really quick on us, and you guys will ask questions about this. We have a full service package, that starts at $32.50. Basically helps you with everything. We've got hourly, where basically it's a 2-hour minimum. We'll help you with any sort of specific minor aspect of your application. We basically do everything outside of your GMAT. That's what we focus on. We also have a final review package where basically it costs $1,500 when we go through one pass. So we're upping the discount. So if you want a 5% discount, that's fine, but we actually have a 10% discount with a discount code 1908. 1908. You can use it on our website and get a 10% discount. Okay? So ding analysis. So we did this for a couple of candidates. If you want your own personal ding analysis, we will do that for you. We'll go through everything in your background, just like we did for these candidates, and give you a write-up. We won't do a webinar where we talk about you. We'll do it direct, okay? And that's $500, okay? So Eric and I debated this, but basically, if you sign up for a package, and we're going to extend it, if you sign up for a package until January 29th, we are going to give you, if you sign up for a school application package and you do a ding analysis, we are going to give you the ding analysis effectively for free. So if you sign up for a ding analysis in the next week and a half, and you sign up for a school application package, we are going to discount the full price of the ding analysis, $500. We're going to discount that from the school application package. Okay, so effectively you're going to get this for free. Okay? Same thing with the pre-application package. If those of you that are applying anew, okay, if you've been dinged, you've been rejected, that's one thing. But if you're applying anew, and you're going to apply for the first time this year, we have a pre-application pack which costs $500. We basically outline, sort of your objectives. We help you articulate your vision statement. We look through your background and give you an idea of what you need to work on, okay, to make yourself a better candidate, have better assets to write about in the fall. It's really helpful. It's $500. Same deal. If you sign up for that by January 29th, in addition to sign up for a package, we'll give it to you for free. So we're doing this, one, because we like Beat the GMAT, second, because we love you guys, all right? But also we want you guys to be better candidates. We get so frustrated when we get people in the fall, been thinking about applying for the whole year, and they have flaws in their applications or flaws in their background, and we don't have time to address them. So we're trying to encourage you guys to address those weaknesses, okay? And again, the 10% discount code is 1908. Okay? So if you're planning this year, get ready. Don't wait. Rolling admissions, get started as soon as you can. Some of you guys are looking at European schools or exec MBAs. That's moving right now, okay? Really be brutally honest with yourself. It's the only way to get into these schools. You can't hide this stuff. It's not like a date where you can sort of hide the fact you're a little bit chubby by tucking your pot belly. That's what I did to meet my wife. You're going to be exposed, okay? So you have to really be honest about yourself, okay? We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on our blog. Eric Allen will punch me in the face if I don't say that. We got the 10% discount code. We've designed a page, adminadvantage.com/beatthegmat. A very good-looking man on the front. Go to that page, and basically you can indicate what you want, okay? And that's it. If you want a free consultation, go to sketch.me/adminadvantage. There are lots of ways to contact us. We want to hear from you. We want you guys getting in. Business school is not life-changing, but it's really a fantastic experience. And, we want you guys to have that opportunity to get after your goals. So hopefully this has been helpful. I know it's being taped. It's going to be on our site, and it's going to be on Beat the GMAT site. And I'll take questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kofi. And I know where I'm going right after this session. I'm going directly to adminadvantage.com/beatthegmat to see that good-looking man. So thanks for that tip. We did have a number of questions coming in, and Kofi, I was wondering whether you'd be open to giving us a couple extra minutes just to address some of these questions.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay,
I'm here.
thank you so much. I know we're over time, but really, really appreciate this. I see a question coming in from Namita, and Namita is asking about word limits. So how strict are these word limits? So for example, if a essay is asking for, or a school is asking for 500 words for an essay question, can you go slightly over? Is that going to be something that can ding you?
No, that's not going to be dingable, I guess. I should coin that word, patent it. It's not going to be dingable. Rule of thumb, you don't want to be more than 10% over the word count. So in that 500-word essay, 550 words is acceptable. I will say that we really like our candidates being at the word count. So we kind of don't really let our candidates go over, but we're kind of anal people in general like that. But no, that's not an offense. But I will say that you don't want to seem egregious. You don't want to seem like you're giving yourself an undue advantage over the next candidate. So generally, don't go more than 10% over. But you know, these essays give you enough capacity, enough words to answer the question thoroughly in the word count, if you know what you're doing.
Right. Right. Great. Thank you. Well, another question about essays, and this has to do with optional essays. Are optional essays actually optional? And do you have any suggestions for what you should write for optional essays?
Sure. Good question. They are optional unless you have problems, right? So they are optional. Candidates that write about, use those optional essays typically are addressing flaws. So they're typically addressing weak GPAs, weak GMAT, shoddy or spotty work history. They're also addressing, as we sort of highlighted here, not using, a supervisor for your recommendation, at least one of them. Occasionally they address, and this is where it gets dicey, they address something that you wanted to leave, something that you wanted to include in your application but couldn't. Now there's some schools that ask you that, so they'll tell you you can use this optional essay to address anything you'd like to talk about, and you can do it there, right? But some schools really clearly indicate that you should be writing about weaknesses, and there's kind of nothing more annoying than someone writing about, I only got a 760 on my GMAT, and that's a weakness, right? That shows a lack of judgment. So don't feel like you have to write. Most of our candidates do not write the optional essays. But if you have an issue with your application, if you have a GPA that's, I'd say, 0.2 plus away from the mean, if you have a GMAT that's, let's call it 30 to 40 points below the mean, then you probably should take the time to answer and use that optional essay.
So this next question actually comes from Shantanu, and bless you, Shantanu, because I know it's really late in India and you have a question about Indian candidates. So thanks for coming, or really early in the morning, I should say. So thanks for waking up early.
Hardcore, thank you. Yeah.
This question is about suggestions on how an Indian candidate can differentiate himself. So let me expand that a little bit more. Are there certain typecasts that maybe Indian candidates should be aware of from when they encounter admissions committees, and what can be done in their essays or in their application to show that they're actually differentiated?
Right, good question. Yeah, there is one main typecast, and it is well, there are a couple. There's the Indian male that works in technology that wants to basically get on the business side of the industry. Okay, that's one type. There's the Indian male that works in technology, or female. Well, actually, it's really male. There's the Indian male that works in technology that wants to go back to India and start a business. Okay, those are sort of the main two typecasts. What I would say is that there's nothing you can do about sort of, if you work at, one of these big tech companies, that's something you obviously should be proud of. But what I would say is that I would really have the Indian candidates, you guys should really focus on your catalyst, the main reason why you're looking to go to school, what it is that, not just about making money, but what it is that piqued your interest in getting on the business side. So if you want to get on the business side, that's fine. But write about a project you did. Write about maybe, either a project you did where you were working on the technology side and, you wanted to get on the business side but you weren't allowed to, or you're working on the technology side and you got a snippet on doing strategy or marketing, and that sort of, catalyzed your real passion for basically going, for getting an MBA. If you're thinking about starting a company, be specific about the kind of company you want to start. Be specific about knowing the market. So, I want to basically start an energy company because I'm from sort of the northwest of India. This, for an example, I have no idea if it's true, where, basically, hydroelectric power basically is at a real, people at a real disadvantage. And if we basically could power this region, be able to tap into a lot of the unlimited resources and talent that these people in this region have, right? So you're writing about, specifically why you want to start this company, what the catalyst was. You're indicating a knowledge of the market by being from this area, et cetera. So those are the things you need to do. Know your market, know, what catalyst you go to business school, and really have phenomenal, or really write about at least, getting great leadership outside of school. Leadership's not being in the dance troupe. Leadership is doing something, where you made an impact. And we're really sensitive. It's really a great opportunity for an Indian applicant to actually differentiate yourself, because a lot of Indian applicants, just culturally, there isn't as much, it seems like, as much of a focus on extracurriculars. So if you have those and you've led, write about that. We've worked with so many Indian applicants who've had that stuff and haven't written about it until we push them. And it's really been quite helpful in terms of getting them into school.
Christine has a question about round 3. Is it worth applying in round 3, or should I just wait until the next round 1?
Round 3 I call ROD, the round of death. A little dramatic, but round 3 puts you at a severe disadvantage. So I can't answer if it's worth it, because candidates do get in, okay? But you better be a super strong candidate and be super unique, and also have a reason for why you're applying round 3. So there are 2 negative biases that occur with round 3 applicants, okay? One, the business schools assume that you probably didn't get into some place you really want to go round 1, and that they're your second or third choice, right? Because theoretically, you'd have enough time. You applied round 1 in October, didn't get in, or even round 2, didn't get in, and then basically say, oh crap, I'm scrambling, I better apply someplace. And nobody wants to be somebody's second choice. Secondly, they may think that you weren't really organized in your pursuit. So you couldn't get it together. You really just sort of made a late decision you want to go to business school. Those are 2 hugely negative biases when you're dealing with so many candidates that are on top of their stuff and have prepared and really want to go. Thirdly, there are not that many spots left. Most of these top 20 schools have filled 90% of their class, 85%, 90% of their class in the first 2 rounds, and there isn't as much free money available, okay? So, it's really hard to get into school. It's really hard to get into school with money. And then on top of that, if you don't get in, you have less time to make yourself a different or better candidate, right? So if you don't get into business school, you apply round 3, that's in March, you're probably going to need to apply around 1 or around 2 later. So you're giving yourself, for the next year, right? You're giving yourself literally, 6 to 8 months to basically make yourself better, and that's really tricky to do. So I can't answer whether or not it's worth it. There are very few candidates, and we probably turn down money in our company doing this, but there are not that many candidates that we advise to apply round 3, because they typically don't have good reasons for why they're applying so late, and they're typically not that different. They don't have something that's so critically different, so critically phenomenal when they apply. So we don't push a lot of people to apply round 3.
Gotcha. And Kofi, just a notice that we lost you a little bit towards the end in terms of your volume.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think we captured the essence of your response to
okay.
I will say this, just a little fun fact. I've met only one person in my entire last 7 years running Beat the GMAT who's ever gotten into a school round 3. Not to say that that's the only person. Clearly there are lots, but it's very challenging, and you have to have a really good reason as to doing that.
Yeah, let me give you, Eric, so let me give you a round 3 friend of mine who got into Wharton.
Okay.
Olympian. He was an Olympian. His name's Steve Holman. He was America's #1 ranked miler. You can look him up. He was an Olympian. Went to literally two Olympics. Was America's #1 ranked miler for about 7 years, and was literally running finishing his professional season basically during round 1 or round 2. That's the kind of guy or woman that gets in round 3, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, and if that's to the audience out there, if that sounds like you, then by all means you should apply. There's still a little bit of time for round 3.
That's true. If you are that person, definitely apply.
Yes, exactly. So let's move on to a question from Josh. Josh is asking, he says, I've never heard of anyone going to a top school who has a similar work experience as I do, which is in an advertising agency. Is an advertising background a ding in one's work experience? Let's expand that a little further and saying, what about other unconventional backgrounds where traditionally people don't go into business school? Is that an automatic ding, or what are your thoughts on that?
No way. No, it's not. And so I can't tell you how many candidates we have with conventional backgrounds that are scrambling to have something unconventional about them. So you see it all the time. So, you see military people, that's kind of unconventional. They're in business school. You see a lot of marketing people, a lot of advertising people in business school. The challenge that non-traditional applicants have, and I think we did a webinar with you guys on this, Eric. The challenge they have is making sure that their skills are relevant for an MBA classroom and that the MBA skills that they're getting are going to be relevant for their future career. So that's where they have to place their emphasis and their bias on indicating what it is that they've done historically. So you being an advertising person, it might be, you could write about sort of the importance of communication in business. You could write about how you've seen so many businesses, you've seen two businesses with very similar products and focuses try to, build themselves and expand, but one company did that much better than the other because, it had a better marketing message or had a better marketing or advertising strategy. And you can sort of extrapolate that and say that's a perspective you're going to bring to the classroom that's going to be really relevant for people that want to build their own companies, which happens a lot now with people in business school. So that is certainly a track you could take, or tack you could take even, to make yourself better and make yourself a better applicant. And I think also, depending on what you want to do afterwards, if you want to go back in advertising and say there are not a lot of MBAs with that background, you can write about how the skills that you're going to choose or build, the skills you're going to obtain are going to be relevant. So I was stumbling because I was actually thinking about, I have two personal friends that work at Leo Burnett who are both Harvard Business School alumni. So there you go, right? That's not a hindrance at all.
Very good. Kumar has a question about recommendations. And this is more of he's asking for your opinion as to whether recommendations are more important than essays. This is sort of there's always a debate on this Beat the GMAT, which is like, what is more important in your application package? Is it the recommendations or the essays? And
essays. That's not even a debate. Essays. Yeah. Next. No, I'm kidding. No. No, essays capture your voice. There's way more content in the essays. The recommendations don't offer a lot of content. The recommendations are somebody else's perspective or analysis on you. Now, they're both important. The recommendations should be confirmational on what you've written about in your essays and what you've written about on your resume and the non-essay data portion of your application and also your interviews. But there's in no way, shape, or form a recommendation is more important ever than your essays.
Very good. Thanks for ending that debate. Hopefully we won't sort of extrapolating on this idea. Kent, I hope I pronounced that name correctly, is asking, does it look bad to take the GMAT twice?
Nope, absolutely not. So a lot of candidates take it twice. It may look a little bit weird if you take it 4 times, but we've seen a lot of successful candidates take it 3 times, even 4. Now twice shows persistence. 5 times shows maybe, a little bit of craziness, right? So twice is okay. Now, it looks bad if you got a 770 and you're taking it again. It doesn't seem like you have good judgment, but there's no question that taking it twice is not an issue at all.
Very good. So this is a very nuanced question. Thank you, Jennifer, for asking this. Let me just read this. It says, branding, when choosing leadership traits, do you shoot for ones that are similar and pair well together, like integrity and fairness, or ones that are varied, like openness and dedication? Are there certain traits that schools might think are more important than others? So sort of a 2-part question.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I would say is varied. If you had to make a choice, I would choose varied. because it's a broader brand. But I would say is that is Jennifer the name of the person who asked the
Jennifer.
question? Jennifer, what I'd say to you is that you have plenty of opportunity to showcase multiple leadership characteristics if you think about it across your essays, letters of recommendation, your resume, and the non-essay data portion of your application. So you should not have to make a choice like that. You may only be able to write about, say, professional characteristics like being analytical or being intellectual in your, in your essays, but that's where you have your recommender write about maybe your, civic or community mindedness or your leadership, right? So you shouldn't really have to make that choice. You have enough space and enough assets that, if you plan everything holistically, you can get all of them in. Eric, what was the second part of the question?
So let me go back to that. The second part of the question are there certain traits that schools might think are more important than others?
I think that yes. So what I would say is a fairly new trait, which is in vogue, is integrity and sort of being ethically principled. And that has happened in light of sort of the scandals of 2008. It's happened, in the last decade, really, when I was in school, dating myself a little bit, it was Enron, 2001, 2002, 2003. And so business schools started becoming a little bit more focused on ethics and leadership. And in fact, 2 years ago, Harvard appointed Dean Noria, who's kind of one of the fathers of modern ethics in business school. And they actually had their students take like their version of a Hippocratic oath when they graduate. I think they stopped doing that. So integrity and ethics is really important. Leadership at all these schools is really important. If you are somebody that isn't scientific in your academic background and/or has not worked in business, being analytical, it's really important that you stress that. If you major in economics or accounting or business and/or like a hardcore science like physics or I guess neurobiology in my case, and/or you work in business like in a major corporation, you don't need to stress that you're analytical, right? You need to stress all the other stuff, being a great communicator. But I would say of the list, probably the most important ones are being sort of civically or community-minded, being a great communicator, having exceptional leadership skills, and being innovative. Those are and then having integrity. Those are probably the 5 or 6 that I think are most relevant for most applicants.
Very good. A tough question there. I see a couple of questions coming in. I think we might have touched the nerve when we discussed round 3 because there's follow-ups about the round 3 response that you provided, which is from Christine and Sid and a couple others.
Okay.
So Christine's asking, so why do schools offer a round 3 when it's pretty much next to impossible to get in?
Because they want your money? No, that's cynical. A couple reasons. One, because there are people that have real reasons why they can't get in, right? Why they couldn't get an application in the first 2 rounds, right? So they do accept some people. I mean, 10 to 15% of their class is not an insignificant number of people. And frankly, it's kind of like disarmament. Like if one school decided not to offer round 3, if Harvard decided not to offer round 3, they'd be at a severe disadvantage to like Columbia or Stanford, right, or Wharton, I guess, if they continue to offer round 3, because people that were really good candidates that really wanted to start business school this fall would say, well, I really want to be in school, and so I'm going to apply to these other programs. So it's kind of a mixture of all of those reasons. But yeah, there are good candidates, and they do accept some members of the class. Don't get me wrong, but it's almost like you're playing on their terms, right? So it's they definitely want to see good candidates. It's great for them because they still get a chance to see good candidates, still get a chance to get those application revenues in, but it's bad for you, right? It's not a great situation for you because, again, they filled so much of their class and they have some certain feelings, but they want to make sure they can find that diamond in the rough. They don't want that person going to another school. So that's part of the reason why they offer it.
Great. Well, Kofi, I think we have time for just 2 more questions here.
Okay.
So why don't we answer Kemi's question, which is, does it help if your recommenders read your essays before they make their own recommendations?
Yeah, generally yes. I certainly think so. But to be totally honest with you, most recommenders probably won't. So most of the time they won't because they're busy. They don't have time. And if you guys work in a big company, your recommender might be being asked by a lot of people to write recommendations. So it's a bit of a heavy ask to ask somebody to read your essays and then write your recommendations. So you guys got to understand, because when I used to write recommendations for college, as well as for business school, sort of before we started this company, and I was investing in people getting into school, but it was a lot for people to expect me to read the whole thing. And we see so many candidates that sometimes can't really calibrate the fact that while they're super enthusiastic about going to business school and it's the first thing on their mind, every day, your recommenders have, they've got other things. They're probably a little bit older than you. They might be married, have families. They've got to manage staff. And then on top of that, they have to basically write other recommendations. So you're much better off just meeting with them for half an hour or giving them bullet points on the high-level things that you said in your application and what specifically you're looking for them to emphasize, both with regard to roles and with regard to accomplishments and with regard to brand characteristics, giving them those things in a half-page or a three-quarter page of bullet points along with a 15-minute conversation. That's much more palatable and probably just as effective as asking them to read your essays. And also, your essays could, pardon my language, it could suck, right? So we've seen candidates that have sent their applications to people. So we every year we've got people that come in, they don't get into school. They do a ding analysis. They send us their essays, and then they send us their recommendations. And one of the first questions we ask is, did you send these essays to your recommender? And a lot of times when they say yes and the essays are bad, we think this is not a clear indicate. It's pretty risky, right? We say this does not represent you well. Your recommender, especially if your recommender is an alum of a particular school to which you're applying, they may not really want to support you because they don't want to maybe, they don't want to have somebody get accepted into a program that they think isn't really up to snuff. That person may not be up to snuff, especially if they have a love for that particular program. So it is a little bit risky to do, and it is a heavy lift, and that's why I recommend you don't do it.
Gotcha. Okay, well, Kofi, I think this is going to have to be the last question of the evening. Unfortunately, we're out of time on the Beat the GMAT side. You've been very, very generous with your time, giving us almost an extra half hour for the session. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome. My wife is happy. It's less time harassing her.
Exactly. So this is, I'm going to end it with a pretty tough question that I'm seeing in here. So this may be a way to end on a high note or a low note. We'll find out soon.
Okay.
The question is coming from a person named Shi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Shi. Was wondering about, I wonder what the interviewers look for, but I wonder what alumni interviewers look for and how admissions committees view the interviewers' reports against application materials. So are they looking for inconsistency or new information that supports their hypotheses or just a strong recommendation generally?
Okay, so I'm going to give a simple answer, all of the above. And then I'll give a nuanced answer. So your interview should be a confirmation of what you've written in the application, right? And so most schools do not, the interviewers, especially alumni interviewers, we do not see your application. So we literally get a note. We sign up, we volunteer, saying, well, yeah, we'll review applications. We'll interview candidates. We get a note saying such and such wants to interview with you. We either get a resume from the system or the candidate has to give us a resume. And most of the time we read the resume 15 minutes before the person walks in the door. Okay? That's typically how it goes. So we're totally blind. And the schools are looking for us to echo some of the same points that you wrote about, right? This is their confirmation. Especially, and I'll be totally candid with you, we've been in meetings and heard of school admissions committee members wondering if somebody else wrote the recommendation, someone else wrote the essay for somebody, wrote their application. We've heard admissions committee members say, this sounds way too good to be true. We don't think this guy did this or this woman did this. And so they're looking for us as alumni interviewers to come in and vouch and ascertain whether or not it's true. It's harder for people to BS and pull that stuff off, when they're under sort of, visual scrutiny face-to-face. And there are a lot of contextual clues that we can get as alumni interviewers as to whether or not what you're saying is factual or true, whether you're confident, whether you're a great communicator. If you come across in an interview with halting language, being, basically being, just a terrible interview, and you have, let's say, a 3 on your AWA portion of your GMAT, but your essays are like Hemingway prose or Shakespeare prose, that's a problem. That's a discrepancy. They're looking for us to do that. From your vantage point, so that answers the first point. Yes, they basically want you to offer confirmation. But from your vantage point, you should be using the interview to essentially showcase things in your application that you had to cut short, that you couldn't really display, right? And also new things, because usually when you submit your application, by the time you submit your application and then you get an interview and you actually sit down for the interview, that's probably about a month and a half to 2 months, right, depending on when you submit it. And so there should be some new stuff, hopefully, promotion, new role, new understanding of the school, and you want to be basically showcasing it. You want to seem like you're growing. Now, granted, we, the interviewer, are not going to know that it's new stuff, but we're going to write about that, right? And so the admissions committee member is going to be able to look at your application and look at what we wrote about, and it's like, oh, this is a new wrinkle in this guy or this gal's application. So you definitely want to use it from that perspective. Now, the last thing I want to talk about regarding this is alumni interviewers versus on-campus student interviewers or application committee interviewers. Now, I will tell you that being a former alumni interviewer, there are definitely some kooky alumni interviewers. And I can say this for both Harvard and for Wharton, right? Just some strange people that go to those schools. And basically, admissions committee members know this. So I believe that they typically will discount, like the further away you are from graduating or from the process as an alumni interviewer, I think to a certain extent your interviews could be a little less accepted or a little bit less valid as opposed to somebody on the admissions committee or somebody who's a second year interviewing you directly. So when in doubt, when you have the opportunity to interview on campus or interview with an alumni interviewer, interview on campus. I think that answers the question, right?
Yes, it does. So I think,
okay.
Kofi, we can end on a high note after all. Kofi, thank you so much to you as well as the Admin Advantage team for spending your evening with us to talk about go through this Ding analysis. I certainly learned a lot, and I think our community has also. And I just wanted to mention a few more things to our audience before we close out today. So I went to adminadvantage.com/beatthegmat, and I indeed found the handsome man that Kofi was mentioning earlier. Looks like Barney Stinson from How I Met Your Mother, if you're familiar with that show. And has all the information here about how you can take advantage of some of these offers, including the discount code that you see on the slide right here. So definitely check that out. Kofi, you've probably seen Kofi's name as well across Beat the GMAT. He's one of our most active admission experts on our site. You'll see him on MBAwatch.com often and the Beat the GMAT forums. So he's around. He's really accessible, and I can tell you from personal experience that his team is very friendly and very knowledgeable. So highly recommend that you all reach out to Admin Advantage at some point in your admissions to check out their services. So Kofi, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Oh yeah, no, look, thank you for having us. You guys are offering a great service. Those of you, again, guys, don't be discouraged. We know a number of people who've applied multiple times and gotten into school. So, look, if I can have faith in the Cleveland Browns and we're going to win a championship, you can have faith. We're not going to win a championship this year, but you can have faith. You can have faith in getting into school. So happy New Year to everyone. Keep your chin up, and definitely reach out if we can help. And Eric and B, thank you so much for inviting us.
Great. Thank you, Kofi, and thanks everyone for attending today. We'll talk to you soon. All the best.